it's funny because yes, in a way, I think the Jack's record was like very much a solo record. I mean, not to say that collaboration wasn't key. I mean, Jim was very much the other member of Jack's Mannequin, and by the end, I brought Bobby in, and he played a lot of the guitar on the record. So we built a band kind of out of this solo platform or something, I guess you would say. But I was so leery of being thought of as somebody who left their popular band to go solo, even though I always felt like I was sort of the bastard child of a scene I never belonged in, but was grateful to be there in the punk sort of scene that Something Corporate came out of. Like, I definitely felt really self-conscious that would be how people perceived what was going on, which was really not the deal. I wasn't like looking for glory in Jack's Mannequin. I was just looking for an outlet for my songs at a time when my band and I weren't really, I think, feeling creatively inspired to be back in the studio together. So yeah, I mean, yes, I look at it as a solo project, but I think, at least in the sense of transit, but I also just, more to your point, like, I do see it as a chapter. I see all of these records. I don't really even see the projects. I see the projects globally as a thing, yes. But I also really sort of individually look at each record, even within the Jack's Mannequin era and the Something Corporate era and this wilderness time, period that I'm in. They're all their own little islands of history and personal experience and growth and heartbreak and successes and failures and all that stuff. What's going on? I am Andrew McMahon, and this is an oral history of Jack's Mannequin's Everything in Transit. The origins of the record, probably in some ways, I originally thought it was going to be the beginnings of a Something Corporate record. I do what I do for every record, regardless of project, which is just kind of sit down at the piano and start writing songs. And so I'd written probably, I don't know, a dozen or more songs and demoed them at 4th Street, where we recorded all the Something Corporate records. I went in one day and recorded everything that I'd been working on. We had finished the North record and started touring it. William had left the band and Bobby had joined Something Corporate. And it was actually a pretty good year for us, but I think we were all a little fried, after being on the road and touring and making records together for so long. Josh was ready to make music on his own for a little bit and go, write some of his songs. And so I think gradually over the course of that period of time, I started thinking to myself, well, maybe I'll try and record a couple of tunes on my own and see what that feels like. And so I had reached out to my producer, Jim Wirt, who I'd worked with on the early Something Corporate stuff. And I'd sent him all these demos, and he called me one day. He's like, I really like this song "Holiday from Rio," and that was his like the first thing he raised his hand on, and I think I remember being like, dude, there's I think a dozen other songs on this thing. You only talked about one, but he really liked that song, and there was another song called "Locked Doors," I want to say, and we went in over the course of a couple days and recorded those 2 songs and just did it, the 2 of us, which I had never done that, just going to the studio with a producer by myself. And that was, I would say, the origin was those 2 songs being recorded and just how after being in the studio, where you're in the studio with a full band and just all the madness, and there's a record company and there's all these people around, which had really become the thing with Something Corporate by the end. It just felt really good to be in a room with very little noise and only my instincts and opinions and the instincts and opinions of my producer to just sort of chase down how to make a song great. And the sound was way different because we were sampling drums and playing all the instruments ourselves, and just, you know what I mean? It was just kind of this really this weird little experiment. And for me, that was the beginning. It was just okay, this feels really good, and it felt creatively so inspiring to just, chase down whatever felt right about a certain song and try and invent that sound on the spot, and that's where we started. those are the two I remember cutting sort of early. And I remember sort of having them with me and quietly playing them on the bus for a couple of people here and there, and starting to like feel like there was some excitement about like, oh wow, this sounds totally different. You know, this could be cool. And then I think from there, you know, we kind of got into almost like just full burnout mode touring. You know, like we ended up, I think we were on the road with I want to say we were on the road with Yellow Card, and then we went on the road with The Offspring in Australia, and kind of collectively made the decision as a band, as something corporate, that we would take a break, and just like go on a little hiatus. We weren't breaking up, but we're just like, let's take 6 months off. And, you know, and I was like, I think I'm going to go make some songs on my own. Josh was going to go pursue his band. And that felt good. I mean, the band, we actually, I think all of us were like, yeah, I think it would be nice to just have a moment to breathe. And I came home from that tour in Australia, which was probably sometime, you know, before or around the summer of 2004. And I won't say I freaked out. I think I just sort of all of a sudden did this deep, like, had this sigh of relief, like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be able to go home and be home in California, like on my own for a summer. I had like moved into a house with my best friends from high school, like, you know, and after like going like from age 17 to 21 or 22, you know, I lived on top of these bandmates in tour buses and airplanes and vans for, you know, as we were pursuing this epic dream. But I was really sort of excited to just like be a little bit alone in the world at the moment, you know, and have some space and be able just to kind of hang out with some friends. And, you know, unfortunately, an outcropping of that need to self-reflect and whatever led to the breakup of my relationship at the time, with my now wife, Kelly. But, you know, we had been together through all of the stuff with the band and before, and I was just ready to be alone. And so it kind of, though I had written all these other songs, immediately what happened was the writing process became largely steeped in this concept of both this self-reflective kind of thing and California as the backdrop, and this summer of sort of freedom and inspiration, but also this breakup, you know, and you know, I couldn't tell you the exact order of songs. I think I'm Ready was one of the first songs that I wrote in the process. And weirdly, a lot of that was about the breakup of like the early, like when William left the band and Something Corporate. Some of that experience was written into it, but I found, I think, some new life in this, you know, this breakup I was having with my girlfriend at the time. So yeah, I mean, I think that it unfolded probably largely like the record itself. I mean, I know Holiday was like one of the first songs I recorded. I'm Ready was really early on in the process. I'm Ready definitely was like at the very beginning. And then I would say Bruised was probably next on that. Those were like very early on. And so was the mixtape, actually. Those were probably the beginnings of the album. I would write them it's actually on this piano here that you see over there. Sorry, my studio is a little bit of a mess. Which that was the first touring piano for Something Corporate. I mean, was it maybe, well, not the first, it was the sort of the final touring piano for Something Corporate. But after we were done touring with Yellow Card, I moved it into my bedroom at my house. And, you know, it was like, I would just like wake up in the middle of the night or whatever and roll over and I had the piano right next to my bed, which was like this amazing thing I'd never had in my life. And I'd write these sad songs on the piano, and then I'd call Jim. And I'd say, Jim, I've got a new song. Like, when are you free? And he'd say, well, the studio, we have a session that'll be done at like 6. So I'd drive to LA, I'd drive up to Santa Monica, and we'd meet up at, you know, a lot of times after hours, and we would just work, you know. And that's how he spent the next, you know, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 months. Just every time there was a song, I would just call Jim, run up, I play it on the piano at 4th Street in Santa Monica, and then the two of us would sit there with whatever engineer was there at the time, and we would comb through libraries of tape loops of drums, and we would just layer these sped up and slowed down drum loops onto the songs, and that's how we sort of built every track for the record. I think the thing that I was craving, which is I feel like a very normal thing when you're 21, 22 years old. I mean, it's a very selfish time, right? It's sort of when you're figuring out, you've sort of waded through the initial throes of adulthood and transitioned out of whatever the last of your teenage years or whatever those predispositions are. And, at least in my case, like by 22, I owned a house, and I had been like somewhat successful. But all of it happened while I was away, you know what I mean? And so it was like, all of a sudden I was back in my hometown, but now it was like my life, and I just I didn't really know exactly who I was. I think you get really wrapped up when you're in a band and in a relationship, and you have these really deep connections to people that you forged when you were, at least in my case, when I was a teenager, and some when I was, 15, 16 years old. And all of a sudden now you're like kind of a grown man. And so I almost had to unwind all of those relationships, I think, to know who I was or who I was at the time and get a baseline, you know what I mean? To sort of rebuild everything. And yeah, so it was wild, and it was really fun, but it was also like really heartbreaking and sad too. It was that this duality of emotion was constantly at play. It was like, me and my friends, they were like, at the time, like working at like Blockbuster, and were waiters and doing community college. And I'd finish work on a Friday and we'd be like, let's go to Vegas, we were just doing whatever the fuck we wanted, which was awesome. But I think, I wasn't so alone. I just wasn't so attached, if that makes sense. I had these great friends around me, and I had my production crew in the studio, but I was free to move at whatever time I wanted to. If I wanted to sleep until noon, I did. Or if I wanted to stay up all night, I did. If I wanted to go on a trip, I did. And that felt pretty good at the time. The biggest influence for me at the time that I was working on Transit was Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. And strangely also like sort of new wave of like electronic pop that was coming through with like the Killers. But it was this kind of juxtaposition of what I saw as like, a new wave of alternative music that finally had pushed past like, the era of like Puddle of Mud and Limp Bizkit. And like, when Something Corporate came out, alternative music was really steeped heavily in like nu metal and really aggressive, almost like just, like a new wave of anger, and which was just never my thing. And so I was really excited by some of the stuff that was cropping up on alternative radio, but then also really enjoying digging back into, and specifically into Pet Sounds, which for me was like this major revelation. But like then I was also like going to clubs and seeing bands like The Faint, radical like electronic dance inspired music, TV on the radio. And there was this whole other side of my world. It was like this modern alternative meets, like really classic sort of 60s pop songwriting, and I would say that was all at the core of what I was really into. Bowie, I was super into Bowie. I was really digging back also into like some of the classics that I had missed. I was like Mad Men Across the Water by Elton John was like always on my stereo as well. I wasn't really ever thinking of the commercial aspects of it or where or how it would be listened to. I think in a way there was comfort in knowing that I had a band that was already successful. And frankly, at the time, we all had every intention of making music together again. I didn't make Transit with anything in mind other than like, I knew I was going through something that was really personal, right? And I knew when I was writing that it felt great. Like I felt like I was writing my best songs. And then when I got into the studio, it was so effortless to make to make the music and to arrange the songs, and it was so fun that, and I think it just lined up where a time in my life where I didn't feel like I had any obligations to anyone, and I also felt relatively fearless about what we were doing because, you know, I just was young and didn't fucking care, you know, I was draining my bank account. I mean, absolutely draining my bank account. You know, all of the money that I had made from something corporate, I was daily, it was just like, I was going into the studio and just going like, I don't care. Like I was just, let's just go. I rented out the studio, you know, dozens and dozens and dozens of days because I was just having such a blast there. And to me at that time, and this is how I've always lived my life to some extent, not always the healthiest way as it relates to money, but it's like, I feel like money is, if you money's made to be spent, you know what I mean? And it's made to be spent on the things that enrich your life, you know? And at the time it was like, I just felt so good making the music that it didn't occur to me that could be bad or it could go wrong. You know what I mean? It was like, I'd been in the studio so often with something corporate making records. And I knew every time I left the studio with like the early versions of these songs that I was like, I just want to play this shit over and over again. And I wanted to like go home and play it for my friends. And I felt like, I think that instinct in my mind was proof that it was going to be worth something. I probably had like 6 or 7 of these songs put together, right? And it really started to feel like a thing. You know, they were all kind of early versions of the songs, and that would end up getting some additional layers of production. But most of the songs were recorded in a day or two, you know, and then we did like another layer of production at the end once the label came on board. But I remember, you know, sometime in the late summer, maybe close to the fall, like playing the stuff for my manager at the time and just being like, I don't want to put this out with Geffen because that was something corporate's label. And I was like, how do we get me out of this deal? Because I don't want to give this music to somebody else, you know, like I want to give it to whoever is excited. And I really like, they had a kind of a dingbat working there that didn't give a shit about something corporate when we kind of put out our second record. And I was like, I don't want anything to do with this guy. Like, and he's like, I think I can get you out of your deal, you know? And once he got me out of my deal, and then we met with a couple of record companies, you know, then it became real. And then all of a sudden it was like, okay, now, you know, there was such a foundation for it that I wasn't afraid of involving other people. But at that point, once there was like an A&R guy in the mix and a marketing team and all these, you know, these people, then it became real. It was like, okay, I'm actually going to release a record now, you know, and then you start thinking about the bigger picture and getting nervous about like, are people going to like it? And how do we, you know, and how do we market a record from me? Which like, it was very intentional. I was like, I don't want my picture on the record. I don't want, you know, I don't want my name on the record. People were like, dude, you're an idiot. I was just like, no, like we need to do this completely like grassroots. Wait, don't even tell people that it's me until they hear the music, you know, like that was the whole mission. And maybe it was because I was nervous and hiding and hoping if they didn't like it that I could just pretend it wasn't me. I don't know, maybe. But we started releasing music around South by Southwest. So we started, like in a weird way, started supporting the record early, but the way that we did it, like we put up a website and it was like, you know, this is a story. And there, you know, and it was all this very sort of California branded, really kind of mysterious, like what's happening here. Had a handful of friends and people that were working on the record just like assume identities in message boards and be like, I heard this like new record. I think it sounds like, you know, like we really like, it was very like, we were very shady about how we got the first handful of songs out because I wanted people to know, you know, like where it came from in a sense, but I also wanted it to be judged on its merits and not look like it was some sort of hero play for me, you know, and then that's kind of when we went on the tour, but, you know, never announced the tour as my tour. You know, we just like put out some songs and eventually the word got out, you know, and so that was really fun, you know, and then obviously I got sick right in the middle of that whole process. And then it was impossible to deny whose record it was, because it was like the news broke that I was in the hospital and that I had been on tour with this band. And and I'll be honest, I worked on the album through the whole first month that I was in the hospital. Like, I had already mastered it, but I resequenced the record because all this, like, I just had time. I was like, hooked up to fucking IVs and I was playing the record, and I was like, you know what, I got the track list wrong, and so the label hated me but never said it, because they were like so behind me and wanted things to go well for me with my treatment, that I would call them every couple of days and be like, I'm sorry, I have a new sequence for the record. And then we'd send the mastering engineer in, and I'd be like, oh, you need to shave a second off between this transition. I mean, but once I'd done that, and then things got really serious, and my health got really bad, then it wasn't really about the record anymore, and all of the sort of emissaries of my business, the people at Maverick, the people at my management company, they took over and ran with it. And I just said, like, I'm going to do this now, and that's, and that's what I did. I mean, I was approving artwork until the 11th hour and masterings and all that stuff. But once I saw the booklet and I heard the final sequence, then I kind of washed my hands of it and said, like, I'm going to focus on getting better, I didn't really know how things were going until I was on the road. And I mean, and truthfully, that wasn't, I wouldn't say until like kind of, spring of 2006, I want to say. Like, we booked this concert that was right around this, like, I think it was the 2nd of December, and we booked sort of like it was like a private invite only. It was sort of set up to prove to the industry that I was alive, to give everybody cause to continue working the record and to celebrate the fact that I had made it through. But even that show in December was so touch and go. Like, I was in the hospital up until 2 days before, because I had this like crazy skin reaction, and but I think the first thing that happened really, where all of a sudden we realized that it had kind of hit the zeitgeist, so to speak, was when like One Tree Hill called us, and they were like, we want you to come play on the TV show. And it was like my wife, well, she was my wife yet, but it was Kelly, who we were back together. Now, it was her like favorite TV show. And she was like, One Tree Hill. And the trick was that I had to get to the East Coast in, I don't know, it was probably in December or January or sometime in the winter. My doctor wouldn't let me fly. He was like, you can't get on an airplane. Your immune system is shit, and I was thinking, I was talking to the label, and I was just like, we have to do this. Like, and that's, I'd say it was around that time where my ambition started to really click back in. And I was like, dude, we got to blow this record up. I'm going to be fine. Like, let's do this. And so I went back to my doctor and I said, now, doc, what if I got a tour bus? We had all of the air filters changed out completely. We got a brand new tour bus, and I'm the only one on the bus other than maybe Kelly. And everybody's checked out before we go, and we drive all the way to North Carolina. It was like Wilmington, I think it was filmed. And he was like, look, if you do that, sure, you can go, but I think you're an idiot. You know what I mean? Like, that was his take. He's like, if anything happens, you're going to be fucked, And I was like, we'll hire 2 drivers and we'll double drive all the way across the country and all the way back. And we did it, and it was successful, and it worked. I think that's when I started to realize that people were falling for the record, and that it was taking hold. And then by the spring, we did a small tour, and the shows sold out so fast, and it was like, oh my gosh, wow, like we're selling out the same size rooms that something corporate had, and all of a sudden it was just like, this is crazy. Like, I took a year off to like get cancer, and somehow this project is as big as anything I've ever done. Like, and it was heartening, and I was very grateful to the fans that carried the torch for sure. What's so fascinating about Jack's Mannequin is that we really never had any hit single, especially on the first record. I had so much love for everybody that worked that record. You know, it was, you know, I signed with Maverick, and Maverick was a somewhat independently operated label that had distribution through Warner Brothers. And that's why I went to them, because it was a small team. I think they had a staff of 12 or 13 people, but they also could use the radio staff of Warner Brothers. And, you know, we got a little bit of play on the mixtape, like a little bit of play on radio. But again, it was a different time in the sense that, you know, you could be kind of popular underground and still sell records. You know, I mean, I think that Jack's Mannequin record probably sold 300,000 or 400,000 copies. I couldn't tell you now if that's, but we sold records with that album. But no radio really supported it. I mean, the mixtape was the first song that came out, and I was just like, you know, we had a video of us playing the mixtape live, and so it was like they were able to throw all these graphics around it and do this really cool animated video. One Tree Hill, like, they actually put out the mixtape somehow as a single, something corporate barely ever got any radio. It seemed that Jack's Mannequin wasn't either. I had a lot of hope for Dark Blue, but even with Dark Blue, we made this bazillion-dollar music video, and then they never really worked at a radio. The record itself had such a point of view. I think the marketing of the record was done so well, and the people that wanted, the people that I entrusted to put the album out worked so hard to create a culture around it and support the culture that grew out of it. That you know, I think it afforded it this extra layer of connectivity, you know, and I think part of that is because the lyric throughout the album is so personal and so thematic and so you know, and really it is trying to do this thing that I think the best of pop music does this, where it's like there's a balance between sort of the dark and the light and the happy and the sad. And if the lyric is really heavy, then the drums are fast, or, you know what I mean? Like, you know, and I think there was a lot of that on this record, that even though some of the songs themselves were really, you know, were really kind of heartbroken, there was still this element of hope in the song arrangements that made you could dance while you felt that thing. I was in that age bracket, and my fans were in this age bracket, sort of straddling youth and adulthood, where it really felt like a real coming of age story, you know, and you add this layer of me getting sick in the middle of it. I think it shined a light on the culture that had come out of the Something Corporate era, which was really good-natured fans, you know, people who were showing up to shows because they wanted to be a part of something, and were getting into rooms to sort of emote together and to sweat and just shake off whatever, like the craziness of just growing up in the world feels like, and I think all of those elements combine to make this rad little army of music lovers and fans of the album that really did bond together. And a lot of it, at least for me, felt rooted in this whole other like love and support for what I was going through, you know? And so it just deepened, in my mind at least, or me personally, it deepened that bond to the culture behind my music and my fan base, you know, because I felt it, you know, when I was getting better, I wanted so badly to rejoin all of you, you know, and I wanted to be in those rooms and to celebrate being alive and sing these songs that meant so much to me. And I just, I think there was just that energy around it that we all felt, which was like, you know, that's a 1 in a million thing that I don't know that a lot of artists ever get to experience. And it was wrapped up in a lot of trauma for me, but it was also really, you know, really healing and helped me get better too, which was pretty remarkable in my mind. I'm also grateful that I have a snapshot of what my life looked like right before sort of it got turned completely upside down. I felt like I was going through so much at the time that I wrote it, having no idea the absolute freight train of life that was about to hit me, you know, and so to me, I think I'm just grateful that my instincts and my bandmates in Something Corporate and all of these things, all of these stars aligned, that the girlfriend that I broke up with decided she would still marry me one day. That there's just, there was so much that of my life that sort of shifted around the making of this record. And I am really grateful that I was able to find the time and the space to live it and write it down.